Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I'm the author of the book The Mystery of Adam. I have talked a lot about the creation of the first human being and my belief that the first human being was not a man, and how this lie that we were told for thousands of years affected um, the Bible writers and even today's theologian. The way we look at every section about women and the relationship men have with women have to do with how we view how the first human being was created. And I also said that even Paul was affected by this false interpretation. So I started in my last video to share how Jesus thought about women, because that is where we need to start. We cannot look at the Bible writers and expect that the Bible writers, who are fallen men, will tell us the correct story or even the correct interpretation. Not even Paul, because Paul was affected severely by his culture, by his upbringing, by his education. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees, and he went by Talmud. And Talmud is not very supportive of women. And matter of fact, continued male dominance to its core. So the last video, I shared about how Jesus, and the first story about how Jesus relates to women, and I used the Samaritan woman that Jesus met at the well, Jacob's well. I used that story as my first example, and I just think it's a great start to show that Jesus totally went against tradition, Jewish tradition. I said that the Jews treated women because they really strayed away from God pretty far. During Jesus' time, Jesus many times came down very hard on the Pharisees, who did not really follow the law of Moses, but followed rather the interpretation of some rabbis. Uh, that was written down in Talmud. So he was really upset about that. And so Jesus treats women very different. Even the disciples and the apostles of Jesus could not understand the way he was treating women. This first story about the Samaritan woman really showed that very clearly, that they were surprised, not even surprised, but shocked, very shocked that Jesus was talking to a strange woman somewhere at a well, nobody around. And they just couldn't understand why he would go against Jewish tradition. But Jesus knew what he was doing. He did not just see that this woman, was a Samaritan, a half Jew that was unclean in the eyes of the rabbis, but he saw the desperate woman. And so today I want to read a little bit from my book, and I will go into the next story, which the next uh, story, which is found in Mark 10:2 through 9. And that's the story that I have talked about already a little bit. And that's the story with when the Pharisees asked Jesus whether it was lawful for a man to divorce his wife. So I will go a little more into detail in this story today, but before I go to the new story, I want to read from my book on page 70 about the Samaritan woman. Now, the Samaritan woman knew right away that this man, Jesus, was not an ordinary Jew. He was different. He did not condemn her for being a Samaritan, a woman, or a sinner. She could feel his love and compassion. Jesus restored her self-worth in just a short conversation. She was so strengthened and assured by him that she went to town and told the people about Jesus. Before she met Jesus, she avoided people, but now she wanted to share her positive experience. Jesus not only restored this woman's dignity, but he also gave her a new purpose in life. Now we know in this story that this woman was married several times, and that the man she was living with now was not even her husband. And of course, that was not something that people in the culture agreed with. We don't know why this woman had several husbands and why this woman now was living with a man and wasn't married. I guess she learned from her mistakes and didn't want to repeat uh, another mistake with another man. But again, this woman was really shunned. She went to the well alone without the other women, which usually was the case, that women went together to the well. The water, this woman went alone. So she carried most likely a lot of guilt and avoided human beings or people. But after she met Jesus, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful conversation they had, where Jesus just totally accepted her. And afterwards, the woman was ready to be the first witness in Samaria for Jesus. I mean, that in itself is absolutely incredible, because in those days, women could not be legal witnesses. But Jesus used this woman to be his first witness in Samaria. And for me, that was extraordinary. Now, I chose this story first because as I studied the life of the women in the Gospels, I realized that this event happened very early in the Gospel of John. And I believe that this story may have been the cause of the two events that I will describe next. I always wondered why the Pharisees tested Jesus about divorce and brought before him an adulterous woman. The event in Samaria may have been a cause. Later in this chapter, I will describe another event that also may have been a reason for the Pharisees to test Jesus on this subject. That story happened early in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus forgives the sins of an immoral woman. What happened in Samaria was probably not a secret. The Jews, and especially the scribes and Pharisees, were informed about this extraordinary story. With certainty, it did not go unnoticed that Jesus treated women differently from the norm. He showed special interest in the affairs of women. These facts may have prompted the Pharisees to test Jesus on the two subjects of divorce and adultery. Both cases involved women. The Jews knew that Jesus showed favor and compassion towards them and may have used these examples to find a reason to accuse him. So now we're on page 71, and we're going to the story which happens was described in Mark 10, 2 through 9. The Pharisees asked Jesus whether it was lawful for a man to divorce his wife. He answered and told them, "What did Moses command you?" And he said, "Moses committed man to write a certificate of divorce and sent her away." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this command. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." And again, showing right there that they were equal. He made them male and female. "For this cause a man shall leave father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh." Okay, here again, equality. They become one flesh. No, the man is not over the woman. The woman is not over the man. Both of them are supposed to join each other and become one flesh. Consequently, they are no longer two, but one flesh. "What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." Now Jesus saw the motive and heart of the Pharisees. Their attitude about divorce and women was related to their hardened heart. Sin made them blind to the purpose God had for male and female. The Jews and the culture around them treated their wives as property and therefore never fulfilled God's purpose for the husband and wife or for marriage. The man and the woman never became one. Therefore, marriage was never the union God intended in Genesis 2:24. Human beings created their own definition of marriage and thus ended up with their own version of divorce. Interestingly, the Pharisees asked only if a man could divorce his wife. According to rabbinical law, a woman also had the right, or the law of Moses. The woman also had the right to divorce her husband, but this part was hardly ever practiced. Now, in actuality, the law that was described in Deuteronomy 24:1, where Moses gave instructions for divorce, was actually a case law. But the introduction to a case law, the law is not about divorce, but also what followed. Moses did not command the Jews to give the woman a certificate of divorce. He only allowed it. However, the Jews treated these instructions as a law and used it as an excuse for a man to divorce his wife as he wished. Now, I want to share something right here that I probably didn't write in there. During Jesus' time, there were two courts of law. And in one court of law, and I think it was based on the Rabbi Hillel, and then there was another court of law, which was based on another rabbi's or scholar's belief. One believed that you could divorce your wife for any reason. And the other one believed that you have to have a valid reason to divorce your wife. During Jesus' time, most people went with this law that said, or that law system that said, well, you can divorce your wife for any reason. And matter of fact, sometimes the men even got away with not even giving the wife a divorce paper, which Moses told them they have to do. And Jesus said, and again we have false translations here too. And Jesus said, no, you have to have a reason to divorce your wife. And the only reason when you don't have to give her a divorce paper is in the case of adultery. Okay, so that's when, because that was a sin until death. Ten Commandments is thou shalt not commit adultery. And when you commit adultery, the committing person and the person that committed adultery with either the man or the woman had to be put to death. So it's very important that we do remember that, because in Mark, it actually, again, it has a false translation, and it seems or it appears that Jesus says that he does not allow divorce at all except for adultery. And that is not the case. He said he doesn't allow for a woman to be just sent away without a divorce paper. Because sometimes, when the woman didn't please the husband, they could just totally just send the wife away without a divorce paper. And Jesus says, no, that is not right. Okay? The woman needs a divorce paper. If she does not get a divorce paper, then they don't know, the public does not know that the woman is divorced. And even the man who sent her away may commit adultery if he remarries. So all that is very important and to remember. And so this is what Jesus was talking about. He is showing clearly and he goes against tradition there. I mean, totally. He went, these Pharisees, these Jews treated their women like a piece of property. And when she, was not pleasing anymore, they just kicked her out. And Jesus says, no, God created the man and the woman equal. He created them as male and female. And they were supposed to get together and become one. So how in the world can you, Pharisees, treat women as a piece of property? So the Pharisees knew, even from this story again, that Jesus favored women. And, I guess they brought up these women constantly to test him. So even the disciples, though, they didn't understand Jesus. And after he had this conversation with the Pharisees, they even talked to him. So if you want to continue reading this. But for me, it's just so amazing how Jesus, treats women fairly. He knows that God values women just as much as men. There is no difference. Galatians says there is no more a Jew or Gentile, men or women. They are all one in Christ. And now, of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that is in Galatians. So I think last time I encouraged you to read Galatians, so read that. But yes, the culture during Jesus' time, they valued women very, very low. And so Jesus changed that. He radically supported women and protected women. And that's why women love Jesus so much, is because in him they receive freedom, dignity, value, and they know that they are loved and accepted. So I want you to encourage to read Mark 10, 2 through 9. And remember, when you read the story, also keep that in mind about the two systems and the two belief systems about divorce during Jesus' time. And I think those two systems are still kind of alive. But keep that in mind. And when you read it, remember some of these translations, or probably all of them, I haven't seen a good one. But when you go back to the original text, when they translate divorce, it does not mean or it may be a better translation would be send her away. Okay, not divorce. Because a man could just send his wife away without a divorce paper under one of those court systems. And Jesus says, no, you need to give her a divorce paper because divorce was allowed. And Moses protected women under the law of Moses. And one of the protections for women was that she had a divorce paper. If she didn't have not a divorce paper and she got married again, she could have been stoned. She could have been looked at as as an adulterous woman. And when the Pharisees brought this, which I will talk about later, this adulterous woman before him, that may have been actually the case. That her husband may have just kicked her out. She doesn't have a divorce paper, and she may have gotten, married again. And so now she couldn't prove that her husband actually gave her a divorce. So I'm not quite sure about that, but I will talk about that story sometime later. I will finish up today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And next time I will talk about another story, another encounter Jesus had with women.